when your brother was talking about his interest in what has more or less been his main interest, obviously was films, and music was kind of more or less like a family. It was pretty much what most everyone in your family seems to like gravitate to, except for him.
Yeah.
So because what I found to be interesting was that he maintains that everyone in the family has a good set of musician skills, whereas he was the one that did not and never maintained it, nor never really made an attempt to try to do that, to try to keep up with that, if you will. So I guess what I wanted to start here with you and asking is because when I first heard Frog, I'm sure you heard it before when I said it. I'm not sure if you saw the review as well too, but the
Most of
two
it, yeah.
things so the two things that stuck out for me was one, Tom's performance, and secondly was the music. And it was the first thing I noticed right away. And obviously everything else that puts the pieces together here. But so I was actually really curious about your what it was for you that really was kind of more or less the reason why you stuck with the path in creating music here, where someone as your brother who did not have the same passion such as yourself. Because when I hear with what you've been able to pull off here, especially with some of the songs you did with the one cover you did for Hank Williams song, "I'm So Lonesome," and then the one you wrote for your
Yeah.
mother. Um, in my opinion, I think you do have a great musicianship about you that I thought for me really stuck out with Frog. But it's clearly obviously you still maintain that progression with your music skills. So I'm actually was wondering really if you can just explain to me how everything more or less got started for you in that respect, and where we are with it now, and how you feel that if you feel in any way or shape or form feel like you've gotten better. Because I'm actually kind of curious to see if you play music outside of what you do in the film industry more or less, but if you do more with bands and whatnot, because I honestly couldn't find anything else on YouTube outside of what I could find from your brother's channel and from Frog as well.
Yeah. I mean, most of the music that I've made prior to, I wouldn't say moving into film, but
Mm,
prior to that point when I was in my 20s and 30s, and I can go back farther than that. But as far as finding information on the music, was under a band name, and it was called Flying Machine. So I think if you YouTube Flying Machine,
okay.
Broken Earth was the name of the record.
Okay.
And you'll find some of the music that I kind of focused on when I was in my 20s and playing in rock bands. And I went that whole, all in, living in garages and doing that record label, flirtations and things like that.
Yeah.
That and that experience was actually what made me consider pursuing it as far as, hey, I could do this maybe as a career. Because up to that point, like you said, I think Mike mentioned it in his interview, we were raised, everybody sang,
Yeah. Yeah.
in the culture. Like I think he mentioned the singings and stuff, if
Yeah.
even in school or church or anything like that, that's always like your first gig is playing in one of those arenas or whatever. So up to that point, it was just more just like a thing that we did. It was just a cultural thing, a
Right.
family thing or community thing. Uh, and when I was a sophomore in high school, I had a crush on a girl, like so cliche, and I wanted to learn how to play a guitar and sing because I thought that would make the girl. Turns out that's not necessarily what works. But so once I picked up the guitar and I got relatively good at it, not amazing, but progressed rather quickly. I was like, man, I really like, because up until then it really just was more singing. I really didn't have, some of my older siblings. I'm the youngest of five. Mike's my older brother, and then I've
Hmm.
got a couple of older sisters and another brother. But like I said, it was mostly singing. They played some instruments, but growing up in a small town, there wasn't a whole lot to do. So I would just literally sit on our front porch and play for the cows in the pasture, and so when you're that bored, and you have an audience like cows, they're not going to offer too much criticism. The moos do sound like booze, but that didn't happen too often. So yeah, I mean, so that's when like I was like started the dream
Okay.
part of the music, and I had always I'd sang, and I was always kind of the little young star, for the, get that boy up there and sing a song for us. And so I was like, prior to that, I'd sang in a few what they call Opries. They have them like in these towns of 20, 30,000 people, you know, they have like this Opry, you know, you can go. And so from ages like 12 to 15, you know, I'd go and I'd try to sing in those things, and I'd sing, you know, some Hank Williams, some Don Williams. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. Just a lot of stuff that my dad, you know, had listened to in the 50s,
Right.
60s, 70s. That, you know, I liked that music, and honestly, that's really the type of music that my mom wanted me to play. Would be in that more genteel, gentleman-like genre. Um, but yeah, when I started playing guitar, I started taking it seriously. Went off to college and want to go to school. I just wanted to be around guys. There was no one else in my town that would play. And so I just like, I want to play in a band, you know, I want to know what that feels like. And so I formed a band like literally within a few days of being in college, you know, and of course the members came and go. But I remember the first time I ever played a live show with the music at that point, you know, I was wanting to be a rebel and rebel against the country stuff. So I was like, I'm playing rock and roll, you know, that's what I'm going to do. And the first time I ever played a rock show, I'll just never forget, from striking the first chord, it was like, this is it. This, I don't know in what incarnation this is going to be me, but this is what I'm going to do, come hell or high water if I have to. And I wound up, you know, sleeping in couches, floors, garages, cars, you know, in order to sacrifice to make that dream happen. And then I went all through college, you know, and then I moved to Dallas, the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Mm-hmm.
The guy who I was playing bass guitar with in the band at that time. And we played a little bit around in the area, didn't do very well, you know, and then that kind of messed up. But I met a couple other dudes who, you know, a bass guitarist and a drummer, and we started a new band. And I was in the big city, you know. I mean, I just knew, I didn't understand that Nashville was different or LA was different than Dallas. You know, I just figured, well, there's big skyscrapers, man. There's got to be, this is, if you make it here, you know, like you say about New York, you can make it anywhere.
Right.
Granted, you know, there's some truth to that, but obviously the industry has its preferred places: Nashville, New York, LA.
Right.
Now Austin, which is where I'm at now. My brother and I are actually roommates. But that band, the next band I formed, actually from our first show, had a local record label. That, to me, you know, that was the biggest thing I'd ever been a part of. That label approached us after the show. The same guys that signed like the Toadies.
I know who they are. Yeah, Toadies, yeah, I remember them. Yeah,
from the '90s, you know, the Possum Kingdom song. And so these guys were like big major stars. And so like meeting these guys and I was like just blown away, you know. And so that went on where all these different local labels and a few, you know, of their connected A&Rs from different, you know, labels, you know, that were national labels, started having a little bit of interest in the group. And long story short, we wound up just pretty much being a demo band for all these different interests, you know, for better part.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Basically, well, we want to hear your music. So they would put us in a studio and we would do demos for them. And they'd say, well, we'll keep writing, do this and that. Meanwhile, we're, you know, I got to play with, open for large bands, you know, like I said, you know, the Nixons, the Toadies, stuff that was popular in the late 90s, early 2000s that were from that area. Flicker Stick, that's kind of a random one. You might not remember that one. They weren't that big. But anyway, it was enough to make me think, you know, it's going to happen. It's going to happen, man. Like I got approached by a label of, you know, right out, first crack out of the barrel, or cracker out of the barrel, whatever the saying is. And so, just like I said, committed to it, did a bunch of demos, you know, some of them we were able to keep and sell at shows. And we had a good run. You know, we wound up eventually just saying, you know what, well, we did a tour. We wound up getting a tour through the South Pacific, not USO, but kind of like USO, playing for the military. So I got to go to Malaysia, Japan, Singapore, different places and play for the troops, you know, different bases and whatnot. And that was cool. I mean, it was definitely different, and it was definitely a tour. I finally actually got sick of riding in a plane, you know, and you understand why bands that do long tours would be like, get a little over it. But we wound up doing that. And then we used the money from that to actually, we're just going to record our own record, because we've been we felt like if, at the time it was right as MySpace, it was kind of
Yeah, I understand.
thing.
Yeah,
And like labels were like, well, how many MySpace followers do you have? How many
yeah.
listens do you have a day? And it just like, you pretty much got to where you're like, man, I think that they want us to do all the work, and then somehow swoop in. And so we just figured we'd just use that money and record our own record. Wound up having an investor that owned a few companies in the Dallas area that dabbled in little local bands kind of as a hobby. He was a nice guy, and he gave us some money to go to Memphis. We actually recorded in Ardent Studios, the full-length record with a major producer. And then that didn't work out. Like, it was just like 8 years into being a band, we're like, okay, while we're recording, we're in this major producer, this major studio, we're doing a full-length record, the best equipment in the world. Still didn't pan out, mostly because we just had some disagreements with how it was mixed. And so you're real timid to approach a person of this, who you feel like and who is doing you a favor. And so he didn't want to change the mix. So then we recorded the record again, and by this point we were just like, we felt like our own cover band. We played these same songs so many times. It's just like, I think Mike, he used to come to our shows, and he would be like, the problem with this show or that show is this, y'all have become your own cover band, because you can only play the same songs for the same people so many years,
Right.
Over time. And we were stuck between wanting to manage ourselves, but also not being very good at it. You know what I'm saying? It's
Interesting.
the idea of somebody coming in and helping out was like, sometimes the guy with the idea isn't the best, with the actual execution. But we wound up just producing the record, and it sounded great. It's the one that I said is available on YouTube. The name of the band wasn't very original. It was Flying Machine, which is the first thing we had going. There was like 18 Flying Machines. I will say that we were the only Flying Machine that had permission from the original Flying Machine in the 70s. They had a band, pretty obscure hit. The song was called Rosemary. It's like, smile a little smile for me.
Sounds familiar.
Rosemary. Yeah, it's like, you're like, I think I've heard it.
Yeah.
Anyway, they were big enough, that they could sue us. But I emailed the guy, and he was like, he was like, I'm long since retired. He was in the UK somewhere, and he's like, I'm long since retired. He's like, take the name and use it well. But by that point, our drummer had we had a really good drummer, and all of the pop acts that were signed in the area that were trying to steal him from us, and finally somebody did. So we lost the drummer. 8 years down the road, released the record, and the Flying Machine just crashed. It was like, we're done. We had a good run. We've been all over the world, didn't make it as far as we wanted to go or had dreamed or whatever, but I did a lot of cool things. I partied, with so many celebrities, hung out with so many celebrities, that loved the band, listened to my music, and so have someone of that caliber that you respect, telling you to your face after they enjoy your set and your show, there's a lot of things that were definitely successes. And that was that ended pretty much when I was in my early 30s. And so after that went south, I was like, new city. Mike had already moved to Austin. I was like, I'm going to go to Austin, kind of over playing in a band. I still like playing with people, and I still play for fun as far as live shows. And I do actually, there's still a road warrior, got rock and roller in me. That's I've got some music that I've been perpetually working on that I will eventually get released. And I feel like it'll be somewhere between the rock and the roots, which is the country stuff, I guess.
Okay.
Somehow in an original, I mean, it might not come out original, but I hope to try to like pull all of those things together that you can hear, like, all the pool of influences into one genre. But that's what everybody hopes to do with music. At the end of the day, you just got to be true to yourself. But,
right.
That kind of brings me up to speed, but that was my early 30s. I moved to Austin, and I had always loved film, and like many of us that grew up in the 70s and the 80s and even the 90s, I'm not sure how old you are. You look definitely younger than me, but the theater, the magic of the theater experience was just something that was very special, you
Yeah,
know.
it was for me too. Yeah.
In addition to the music, you know, I'm like,
Yeah.
well, I'm a musician and I like all different sorts of music. So, you know, I'd like to maybe I could make soundtracks or music for motion picture to some degree, or just that dabble into that side of the arts. I don't know if that answered your question.
And well, you know what? It's interesting because I'm really curious about what you just said right there, because there's actually quite a few things I want to get into with you about what you just mentioned. But so you mentioned about, since you're a big fan of movies though, but and the idea of having music mixed into the films, like for you, what was that one film that where you saw the movie and then heard the music and you're like, that's it, that's what I want to do?
Last of the Mohicans, no doubt.
Really interesting. Okay.
I remember when I was 17 and I got all these car speakers. I mean, like, and just, I didn't have access to like a big surround sound, but
Interesting.
I set up my whole bedroom with all just, and it wasn't even, it was just a surround, it wasn't really surround, but surrounded my room with that. And I was like, would blast that soundtrack. And I'm like, that wasn't the moment that I decided, I guess I wanted to try that, but
it was a catalyst, more or less.
Catalyst, yeah, not consciously, but it always kind of gave me the goosebumps, made my hair raise a little bit. And at that point, I hadn't really learned much more than the guitar. So the idea of making the music, I was more fascinated by it, and I had yet to really kind of break down what was going on, you know, as far as the technical aspects of music. My school actually didn't even have a music program. My high school, we were so small. So I didn't actually take music theory until I got into college. And so I had to start, you know, at music appreciation and then music one, theory two, and moved on from there. And then learned mostly, I took some piano lessons and some violin lessons, just anything that I could dabble into to try to like broaden the horizon of what I could.
Right.
But yeah, definitely Last of the Mohicans. And that's not necessarily the type of music that I'd want to make. I don't even know, but it was just, there was something about, you know, that whole scene at the end of the movie where it just goes crazy, you know, with the Duncan guy gives himself up, you know, for it's a great film. But yeah, I would definitely say that there were definitely moments in films before that also, like I said, that were earlier in life that have those lasting impacts. Some of them are kind of predictable, like the movie The Natural.
Yeah, I know.
Redford, Randy Newman's soundtrack with that. You know, we saw that, my dad took us to see that for I think my brother's 9th birthday. And so that's attached to a father and brother kind of memory. So that's etched in your brain. Blade Runner, definitely, you know, I think Vangelis did the soundtrack for that originally. And so those movies, as far as, once I kind of went through a phase where I was, like I said, when I was young, where I was more fascinated with it, then went through the, you know, the teenage and the 20s and 30s era where I didn't really focus on the film that much. But then, like I said, after the band stuff went aside, you know, I don't know if it's just a natural progression for people, but that's when I started moving into film. And, you know, that was like 10 years ago. So I don't know that there's one specific film that kind of reignited me to want to get back into it, other than just my life and then knowing that my brother, you know, kind of our dream, you know, maybe we could make something together. And one thing I learned is that, well, music is probably easier to manifest than a film, but no doubt, like a record is easier to make happen, if you will, especially in this technology.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, I got you.
It's easier to make music happen, at least in my opinion, than it is to make a film, because, well, the least of which, you know, you got to make the music for the film, so there's at least that part of it. But having my brother be on the visual side of things, and he'd done things like taking photos for the record, things like shot little music videos, but yeah, I guess that moment in life is where, like I said, working with him, I kind of rambled off. Sorry. I don't know.
That's okay. That's fine. So. Well, I mean, I'm glad you did that, because again, there's a lot of things you've said that really did pique my interest and want to get into, because so to kind of go back with what you said earlier about how you were trying to more or less make into the industry because you wanted to achieve that level of success that I think, well, like a lot of us here, where we see something and we think if you can achieve that, that means you've made it. So therefore, there's a lot of other more opportunities that would come with that. But because there's something about your brother had said too about his experience, where I'm sure you already obviously know the story, where he was in California and he had a gig working on the first SpongeBob theatrical film, and then the opportunity came for him to work on the animated division, but not in the capacity he wants to work as far as film is concerned, and took a step back, and then where most people would say take the that opportunity because it would pay you well and there's a longevity with that career considering the amount of success that would come with that, but he said no. But so that side of the story of what he had told was really really interesting. And it was a lot that I learned about him as a person from him sharing that. But with you, on the other hand, I think that what I found interesting with you is that you try to get to that level of success that you thought was the level of success that more or less kind of made you to put you in a position where I've made it. But yet you still experience another form of success when you had mentioned about how you've gotten people that you admired that came up to you directly and said, I loved what you did. And therefore you felt a sense of like, what's the word I want to use? Like, almost in a way, like an approval, and then been able to travel around the world to play music, have that experience and seeing it at that level, maybe not in the level where people will notice you, but level in the scene that what it takes to have to get to, in the level where you have to travel consistently and have that effect on you when you understand how a lot of bands are just getting worn out. They take long breaks where everyone's demanding for the return. So you understood that, and having seen that more or less kind of like under the radar, I'm wondering how much of that changed your perception about how you look at yourself and realize that what was more important and what wasn't as important as you thought it was before you more or less experienced that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, you definitely go through the disappointment
Right.
phase, of like,
Right.
and some of it is hindsight. And the more you go through that, the more you start to be able to look in real time and appreciate. But sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Sorry, I totally blanked. What was the question? Sorry, I'm sorry.
So that's fine. The question was that because you had that experience where you try to you try to have a level of success that you thought that if you made it, that meant you had reached a pinnacle where people looked at your work, admired what you did, and the result that you were able to continue on a career that where you get to pursue your passion and obviously make money from that. But since you had struggled throughout the years to try to get to that level, but never actually in more or less achieve it, but you have had that experience to a degree where you were under the radar, but you could see exactly what all these more or less famous musicians had gone through, and seeing the amount of work that goes with that. And then once you had come back after you had been worn out, my question was to you is that because you've seen it, up close and personal, but more or less under the radar, having that same exact experience to a degree, I would say, where more or less the famous musicians have, but with more attention, obviously, on them, or eyes on them. Seeing that up close, I would imagine that after coming back home after a lengthy period of time, that you realize that something had changed for you. Realize that the level of success that you were trying to achieve, I'm sure, had changed for you about how you perceive, how you look at yourself as what you thought was really important, what you thought what wasn't important. Because I would imagine that the amount of years you were on the road, all the highs and lows, and seeing that where most people don't know you as far as the worldwide audience is concerned, but seeing what it's like for other people who are famous, who do have that attention, and seeing what they go through, and you probably realize that I don't think I want to go through that. But because I've experienced that to a degree, something might have changed for you along the way. So I was curious about what that was for
Oh
you
yeah,
personally
sorry.
that would have changed, and what would have made you reconsider about what was more a priority than what you thought a couple of years beforehand that was a priority that's no longer a priority.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I understand now. I would say confidence, not bravado. Which is a lesson that a lot of us have to learn. I A lot of where I got, was my own kind of agenda, and
Mhm.
that got me a ways. But then the disappointment lets you realize that, you know, you did well, but maybe this wasn't for you, and you can see why this could lead you the wrong direction. But alongside that, I also know, not in an arrogant way, but that I knew that I was good enough. So it was not, I knew that the things that I could take away from the, like, I wouldn't call it failure, but we didn't get signed like we wanted to, but
Right.
I know that I know how to write a song. I know how to produce a song now, and I know that the reasons that we didn't make it weren't necessarily for anything other than just, the breaks, those are the breaks, it wasn't because of anything that I was inferior, or that we were inferior, or that my songwriting was inferior, or anything like that. And definitely you can, once you get past the disappointment, I guess to answer your question now, you can take a true confidence into a situation knowing I know what it takes to hear something to see something and hear something in your head, and take it from an idea and bring it to fruition, and make sure that all of the quality, quality checks are there
Right.
along the way,
Right.
to make sure that things check out. And I can write a song like the song for Frog. I hate to use the word template, but there was definitely, it wasn't something that I had to just there's some aspects that had to be off the top of your head,
Right.
but I already knew how long it needed to be. I knew the genre that it needed to be. I knew this, the style, I knew the approach, roughly the instrumentation, that it needed to be. And so in that particular situation, I was able to take those skills and that confidence and kind of step into the character of Frog, if you will, and kind of be the musical voice for what was going on in that character, while still not completely just him, but it is kind of almost like a long music video in a sense. In a sense, I mean,
yeah.
I don't know if that I don't want to take away from the story. I don't mean that it wasn't
right,
a movie,
right.
but it almost plays that way in a sense to me.
That's so interesting. You
At
said
least,
that.
but I personally know that, having gone through, for instance, some of the disappointments that are just, some are, maybe sad at the time, but now you can be like, what, that made me a cliche, but that made me a better person. But I now can relate to people. And so since I can relate to people, it was easy, especially personally, to relate to Tom's character for multiple reasons. He's small town. He's probably really talented at what he does. He suffers from self-confidence, he's got all of those small town quirks about him, but has an air of brilliance about him that you're sure that you kind of want to, after seeing, you kind of want to see, what did he write? What exactly was he? What kind of stories did he write? Or was he a newspaper reporter? Being a writer is a real thing, as he said.
Yeah.
But it helped me to kind of relate to that character, step into that character, and feel for that character from his perspective, from the inside out, so to speak. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but
it does actually. Yeah, it really does. And what's funny, because you mentioned something that I never crossed my mind, that you just said, the fact that it kind of plays like a music video. But as soon as you said that, I actually understood what you meant by that, because thinking about that now, I think you're 100% right. There's something about that form of storytelling that it does have like a musical visual aspect behind it too, that I think you are on point when you said it never crossed my mind. But now that you said that, I honestly, because it's funny, because I said this before in the review, and I talked to this about your brother, and I think even to some degree too with Patricia, that I feel like I've already capped where I have this level of love for the movie, and then you just mentioned something else completely that I just did not see at all, and I'm like looking at it, like, oh, it has a visual music quality about it that I never thought about, that you pointed out to me, that I think was brilliant that you've made that comparison. I think that's quite poetic, to be completely frank with you.
Well,
So Well, so here's because I guess since we're on the topic of fraud, I will actually want to get into this here because I said before that I loved the music in the film, and I'm not sure if your brother had told you the story about how when I was driving around town, just a little area out here in this little place called Stanley, where there's a surrounding that's very similar to what we saw in the video for the movie Frog, and I just stuck around the area for a while, just humming the music that we hear at the end of the movie. I was just driving it for a long hour, but the point is that it always stuck with me. It would hear that tune because it is a very catchy tune. But I think I never really had the time to really think about what it was about the song that you had composed there that really stuck with me. But having your brother share the story of where he had heard you in the room playing and having you hum the song and then have stop because you probably messed up on something and went back at it again, try to get it right. And then when I asked him when he finally put everything together, what was the first thoughts that came to mind? He told me he loved, he cried, and so on. I was really curious about what it was about how you felt intuitively that song, the way you had written it, would work very well for the movie because I'm not sure if that's something you had already had planned out in your head from a previous session you may have had that stuck with you, and then eventually once the opportunity for Frog came around, you realized that I could just use it for that, or did it came more organically as you were starting to compose the music for the movie?
You're talking about the song at the very end, right?
Yes, because I want to talk about that one first before we get to the.
Yeah. No, I was just trying to make sure
Yeah.
that song can't. The songs were definitely composed for the movie. They weren't lying around. But that song came after I wrote the other one, the country tune,
Right.
and I needed something at the end, but I just after trying to write the lyrics for the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And just the tone of the movie, sometimes there's nothing to say but just kind of howling, or hums at the end. And so the movie kind of ends with this, like, what else are you gonna say? There's not really anything poignant to be said that hasn't already been said lyrically. And it's just kind of a when you can't think of the words, sometimes you just hum along, and so that's the feel. I knew it needed to be simple, in the sense that it didn't have a lot going on, not just lyrically but musically. So it's just a G chord just droning along. It's has resolution. The chord is pretty much hovering on one G chord, which is just this positive resolve. The ends well. There's a little exchange on the turnaround where I think it goes into a minor chord. I haven't played it in forever, so I don't exactly remember all the chords. But even the turnaround is real simple, and it's only dark in the sense that I don't know if you remember Frog at the end. He's looking back during the darkness. And at the end, he's looking the other side of the tracks. Yeah. But for a second, he does look back. He's looking forward.
Yeah, you're right.
And he winds up walking back that direction. And it's strange that he's walking that direction. But the minor in that sense, at that point, the past is not, it happened, but it's just there for a second as far as like his reflection is concerned on the moment. And he's like choosing to walk into it, so to speak. And so the minor in that sense, the minor chord, the minor sound, the dark, the struggle in the progression of the chords is short, and overall the whole thing is simple. And along kind of throwing back to what we were saying, about the country style music and just growing up in a small town, humming and stuff like that. Let's be honest, like some of them had the best, command English language. So like you just hum stuff, sometimes your heart gets ahead of your mind.
Right.
Doesn't mean there isn't brilliance in there. It's just maybe not, can't find the words. But yeah, that was I needed a song to end it with. And long story short, it just felt like that. And I thought That's it. That's good enough, you know.
When did you actually feel that when you wrote that you realized that, okay, this is it, this is good, this is going to be great for the film? Like, when did you come to that realization that you've had it, that you found what you were looking for that moment?
Well, I mean, I was recording, and I laid down, you know, the part which is my singing and the acoustic guitar. The moment, I guess, came whenever I added a harmony to it, and it
Okay.
just kind of sang. It jumped out, and then I added like 3 or 4 part harmony to it, you know, just to get the whole choir or chorus choir thing going on. But I think that's the moment that I would say, like, where I felt like it was magical enough, you know.
Yeah.
Um, it also kind of, when I made it, like the first thing that popped into my head, one of the first things that popped into my head beyond the harmony, was the style. Very much reminded me of that. There were a lot of movies in the 70s that used the magical realism that, you know, that was going on with the red bud and frog, that style where it's doesn't seem like it's science fiction, but anything can happen. Anything, you know, can pop out of the
Interesting. I
wood.
never thought of that.
Um,
Interesting.
and those style of movies
Hmm.
that had that kind of song, like, it's not even close to the same genre, but like, you remember, you know who Roger Miller is?
Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
a composer for the animation of Robin Hood,
Yeah. Yeah. I know.
back in the
Yeah.
70s. Kind of had some of that going along to it, you know. At
Okay.
least that's what I gleaned from it, kind of in a disparate kind of way, and felt like they just kind of matched, you know. And then once I cut a little rough take of it, gave it to Mike, you know, and he put it to the video, you know, and we were just watching it before I finished, you know, like mixing it out and polishing it and doing whatever, and it just worked. So I was like, okay, you know, I put so much work into the first song, but sometimes it happens that way.
Yeah.
You work and you work and you work, especially with songwriting, and you're trying to find the right lyric or chord or whatever, and it's just not coming, and then it just comes. And that's kind of how you get, and then you walk away from it, and then as you're away, the key, you know, the clue pops into your mind after it's, as far as like the simple hooks, as far as like I said, coming up with a hook that would
Right.
work or whatever. I mean, yeah, I guess I hope that answers your question.
It does. Well, I mean, so here's what I'm actually curious with you now, because so you put it together, you felt really good about how everything came out. So when you finally saw everything in its final form, did your feeling towards the song change a little bit after hearing it with everything being put together, or were you kind of more in a neutral position where, like, okay, that's good, moving on? I'm curious to see what your perspective on that was once you saw everything in its final form.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not the best audio engineer in the world, but I also kind of had to move on because on this project I was the engineer, so there were other things that had to be done. But I didn't move on in the sense of like, that's good enough. It was definitely well, that works. So now let's go on and finish the, you know, the sweetening and everything, and the mastering of the levels and all that, and all the different audio ins and outs, which that part I'm still definitely learning. It's a lot different making engineering audio for film than it is inside a studio trying to get the energy of any type of music. It's just a different approach. It's very much, it's all of it is get it at the source. That's still the best approach, but film is definitely get it at the source, because there's no way to as far as like getting the audio levels and the dialogue and everything. So yeah, there was that. I felt like I had not had to move on, but it was time, you know, it moved on. And also, you know, playing it for Patricia, both having her sit and you know, just playing it, and then having her like it, both of the pieces, and then laying it down and then seeing her reaction. I was content with it. My brother really liked it. You're always gonna, you know, I think it was I can't remember who said a project is never finished, only a band. Hitchcock. You're always gonna have things that you're gonna want to fix, but part of of moving on, I guess one of the things that I did learn, going back to one of the points we were talking about earlier, as far as the confidence, is knowing when something, like I said, good enough is not the right word. It works is kind of, you know, the way I would approach it, because it's
Okay.
not it's more of a neutral thing at that point. You have to be objective with it at some point. But like I said,
Mm.
seeing there my brother being like, yeah, that's really cool, that works, or and seeing Patricia being like, you know, she was seemed to be pretty happy with it, and so I was like, you know, print it, you know.
So let's get into the other song, the one that plays more or less kind of like the halfway point. So it's funny because Patricia had told me after we were done recording that the song that you had written was, you know, she had another song in mind for that particular scene, and then even at one point, I believe your brother had said that he was using your cover of Hank Williams' "I'm So Lonesome" as kind of more or less as the template to kind of fill in the scene, if you will, and then you end up writing the song. But your insistence with Patricia was that you wanted to keep it kind of that old school Texas country aspect about it because you thought it was very fitting for the scene, which it is. Which I agree 100% when she mentioned that that was your idea, because I actually thought it was her idea if I recall correctly. But when she had said to when she had told me that you had pretty much played literally everything, the guitars, the drums, and obviously you sang in it as well too. I'm not sure anything else you would have done on the record on that track, I'm to say that comes to mind. But again, with that particular song, your brother also mentioned too that the lyrics aren't necessarily about Frog, but it does kind of teeter that line about something that he's going through, but it's not really about him per se, but it's definitely the elements of his life that were more or less sprinkled in that song, which I thought was brilliant because it never crossed my mind that was the case here. So with that song, I was curious about how what you believed was approaching with that old school Texas country aspect of it that you thought worked very well, which obviously we all know what it does. But what else did you feel like was going to work for that song that you thought with the way you approached the lyrics that was going to be fitting for Frog's journey rather than being straight on the nose about this song is about Frog? Because I would think that was going to be the approach, and considering with what I initially thought I heard about what I've heard in the lyrics, but the way your brother explained it here, that's not the case here at all. So I was curious about what that approach was and why you went down that route.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you know, to be on the nose and just to describe to people what their eyes are already seeing, you know, in a lyric wouldn't necessarily, I mean, like I said, it would just be, I don't know if insulting is the right word, you know, but like, here's the
Okay.
part where he drives down the you know, I mean, you have to kind of, you know what I mean? You know, you're like, yeah, we can see that, man, you know, thanks. You have to, you want to create the atmosphere for sure. And you want to have the sentiment be in place, uh, if that makes any sense. Like you said, without, and be as metaphorical as possible, because to me that's just you know, that's just better art altogether. It's just not so clandestine that you're like, this song makes no sense in here, but something that was, seemed like it was independent in its exact nature, but still thematically, as far as the internal struggles that you would be going through, are similar. So if that, I don't know if that answers your question. Just
It does. I know what you're going with here because again, this is the interesting because as you mentioned, the way that you're discussing about the your in this case your writing process here is more or less kind of how your brother approaches it when it comes to the visuals. So I think in that respect, because I was wondering, I never asked him. I'm surprised I didn't because I was curious because I meant to do this after I thought more about what I could have asked your brother. But you know, the one thing that was really interesting for me was that when Patricia had said that you were on set working as a sound guy, and I did see your credits in the name as well too. But I was actually really curious about what it was about the two of you that worked so well together to where he does very well with the visuals, and obviously you do very well with the music. So, you know, I'm not sure if it was a natural team up for you guys to do this together, and understanding how you guys your more or less your work ethic and your approach and how you like to go about doing things here. But for you, what I guess my question really is that where did you discover in this capacity that both you and your brother work so well to the point where you guys are able to work alongside with each other, trusting each other's approaches, and having the confidence to know that I'm going to let Dave do his thing and I'm going to let Mike do his thing without having to have any concerns about any sort of differences that may come up on the way in terms of your partnership, if you will.
Well, yeah, I mean, naturally, we've just us being brothers, and we're so much younger. We're close to each other in age, and then our older siblings are a little farther off. So we've kind of been our own little animal, our entire existence. My mom always said that we were twins separated by 22 months. So he being the elder,
right?
But we've always been kind of like the young boys, and so we've kind of been our own little niche. We've been singing and doing things, competing in sports together, competing in academics together, or on the same team, living in the same household, learning to communicate, having conflicts, but then learning to move past them. So, I mean, there's a lifelong aspect of that now, and actually being a little older now, the ego side, like, I mean, it's just that has no place anymore. At least in my book and in his book, I'm sure, and with Patricia. And just doing so many projects, even past that, all throughout, like I said, like when I was in a band, he would always do anything visual that, so we've been working together our entire lives in some capacity. And when we both went to college, we were both radio, television, and film majors. And so we did a lot of work together from college in this capacity, not just, academics, but once we got to college, we made videos together, because audio or music and audio and the visual, those are the two things that you have, we were kind of two halves of the same coin. And your dreams, kind of overlap in a sense all throughout. We both had the desire to get something done, to make art. Our parents, I think he had mentioned too, we were very much raised in the arts. And so we've always felt like that was a great avenue, not only to express yourself and to get the demons out of yourself, but also feel fulfilled, and also make an impact if that's, what you want to do as far as a certain message and communicate with people. So I guess time and experience working on a bunch of projects together, that's definitely, brought us to the point now that we're older and a little more mature. Like I said, we're able to get along because, like I said, ego doesn't get the job done in those particular situations. And he'll tell me, if something, he's like, I think that blah, 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 blah. And I trust his opinion, and he's about one of the only people that I would let in that inner circle that if they said, this, most people would be like, whatever, I'll make my own thing. Just because that's why I wanted to make music. But when you're making music for someone else, you have to, it's not my record. It's not my movie. I'm part of it, but it's Patricia's film and it's Mike's film and it's these actors' film. And so I don't have a problem coming in, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, takes a lot of focus, takes some experience. Some people just have it naturally. They can just get it and write music or write, do things on the fly. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun. So, I mean, I was willing to make any sacrifice necessary, but thankfully by the time we got around to Frog, it just felt like we were on the same page. And like I said, that I already had a template because he had already cut that sequence
right
to the other cover that I did. And so I just had, like I said, I just had to keep the tempo the same, the starting and figure out where to fill in the blanks as far as the music and the lyrics from there.
So I had a question about something because you brought something up that really caught my attention, which is because you talked about how, when you're making the music, you understand that what you have to make has to be in agreement with someone else, seeing the approach you have for the lyrics you want to write, the music you're composing for the film. But let's say, for example, if Patricia was not leaning on your suggestions in this case, let's talk about the song in the beginning where you suggest let's stick with this more old school country style Texas music, which I think will be very fitting for this scene because of X, Y, and Z. And if she had said to you, "No, I want to go down this route," how do you think you would have handled that, on knowing that you know that you had a good idea and you know that this will actually be fitting for this particular scene, especially for the narrative. But if someone said, "No, I want to do it like this instead," and maybe you're not in agreement with it, but I'm not sure how you would go about it, pursuing it, because I'm not sure if it's a fair question to ask you, but I'm actually really curious about how your perspective is on more or less the team playing aspect, where if someone doesn't agree with your approach and you know it's good, how would you handle that for yourself? And in this case, say if Patricia were to say, "No, like I want to go down this way instead."
I mean, luckily Patricia is a pretty open-minded
Right.
person. She does have her ideas of what she wants to get done, but she's also very selective in who she chooses to work with, and in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
And so she chooses to work, it seems to me, to work with people like with Tom and with Alex, like where the type of direction she gives extends a lot of trust to the actual performer. And I mean, there were, had she said, been like, "No, I want you to record this song and sing this and this and this and that," I mean, it wouldn't have been as fun for me probably to come up with something, and I wouldn't have been maybe as proud, but it is what it is. And as long as it was good and it's her movie, then I'm fine with that. I've made music for other people, and because one thing that I have learned is that music I mean, it sounds cheesy, but it's a gift. It's a gift. It's a gift to yourself, but you also can use that gift in service of other people. And as a performing musician, sometimes I think that a lot of them, you forget that it's really not about you. It's not about you, but it also involves other people and community aspects. And so the willingness to be in service, to use the skills and talents that you may be gifted with, do something to open a door for another person. I mean, that's a fulfilling thing to do in and of itself, and playing, like I said, when we were growing up, playing in churches and schools, a lot of these people, they don't get to hear live guitar all the time. They don't know how to, or whatever. They don't know how to. I mean, a lot of people know how to play it, but like a lot of people don't. And so if you're able to use that music and bring community together in service of people, that's its own sense of fulfillment. And so taking that and plugging it into this situation, I believe in Patricia. I believed in the performances. I believed in this in the movie. And so definitely wouldn't have had a problem, sacrificing. Luckily, honestly, I don't think she changed. She did have a few little minimal request things, but those were more things, like you said, going into it, say, I want it to be this way, and this way. And I just did my best to try to like come up with whatever I was hearing in my head and heart, to make that happen. And so luckily, crisis averted as far as that was concerned. I have played for people, they're like, "Nah, do it this way," and your soul doesn't really enjoy those gigs as much as these. And so that's why these are a little more special. And it felt like I was in its own, rendition of a rock band, because you still have all these key players making this end product. And so there's some camaraderie definitely that you develop in that. But like I said, luckily she wasn't that way. And she liked what I came up with for the most part, at least it seems that way. And so, like I said, it worked out.
So when you're talking about your experiences with people who are making requests that you may not be so fond of here, but having to, for you, when you started going to the pursuit of wanting to, like you said before, make it in the industry, what were some elements about those experiences that you have taken away from that you thought, this is not worth it for you anymore? And I'm not talking about, pursuing your passion. I'm not talking about that, but actually more or less pursuing that, the idea of making it a business, where you start to realize that this is not worth it. This is not, it's a waste of time to be doing this. I'd rather be using my time in other areas here, because this clearly has no no value for me to have to look into and pursue, because there's nothing that I'm going to get out of it here. So it's kind of a long, maybe convoluted question to ask, but I'm curious to see what it was for you to sort of realize that how you thought certain things that were very, very important as far as what you thought were going to have more value for you in terms of making it, that you sort of realize that it's not worth the time to invest in, and you sort of discover what was actually more important in the pursuit of the passion that you have for music.
I mean, there's several things. I mean, you can obviously look at examples, of people that make music that have, and I've met them and conversed with them, that are famous, and then stories you've heard, we've all seen, like, the success doesn't make you happy.
Right.
It's almost a black hole to some degree. Like it's can never be enough. Don't get me wrong, playing in front of thousands of people it's a blast, and it can easily, go to your head and take you and out of, put you in the wrong headspace and maybe think that you're a little too more important than you really are. I mean, in the sense that you're more important than a random person on the street. And that's an easy thing. That's definitely a temptation. And then you see that play out in people. But I guess I was blessed with failure that in certain areas that didn't allow me to get past those thresholds, that gave me perspective, as far as, like, it's not the end of the world that you didn't, tour with, whoever, the big name band, or they, open for, and I did play for some big people, open for some, relatively established bands, but just enough that I could say that, like, I did it, but not enough, like I said, to let it, like, get me to the point where, where I'm the type of person that's like, do you know who I am? Like, no, I have no idea. And just being raised a certain way, when you look at those temptations and you look and see where you were kind of maybe headed that way as a person, but luckily I had good people and peers like my brother around me pretty much the whole time and through the whole journey, that keep you honest. So through those disappointments and those people that keep you honest, you're able to gain some perspective. And honestly, you get tired. You get tired of lugging, your gear on and off stage. You get tired of traveling or whatever. At least at a certain point, there may be a time whenever you want to do it again. But I guess, I just was done with trying to make it in that sense. And so I'm not sure if that answers the question. Sorry, but that's kind of where I landed at the end of the rock and roll, career, if that makes any sense.
So what's actually more of your end game now? Because when you had a perception about what you thought was more or less the goal in mind that you had for yourself about making it in the business, if you will, but having experienced that in going through a new career path, if you will, is still in pursuit of your passion. But what's for you? What's really the end game about, where you feel like you are more or less accomplishing something that's worthwhile for you?
I mean, obviously, to be able to do something and just be able to make to be able to not make money at it, but to be at a point in life where either the thing is making enough money to where I can do it, or I have some sort of success that I can just put all of my time into being creative. I'm 44. I couldn't even, I'm 44 now. So it's like, you start to simplify. So I would love to be able, one day, like I said, I am recording another rock album, just kind of for fun. If it goes somewhere, I'd be like, sure, I'll play this live. It's not like, oh, we got to be banging down the club's doors. We got to be touring, I've got to get a band together. It's more just, I want to make this thing. It would be nice, to make some more, film scores, or to at least be involved somehow with the music. I think that's definitely a possibility. I know that Mike and Patricia are, I'm not saying they'll need me or want to use me specifically for whatever further endeavor, but to continue to make things like that. Um, you know, just simple, It doesn't, I don't have to be a millionaire, or famous. Just to be able to continue to create is kind of the goal at this point. And whatever comes of it.
So, when you are, as you're seeing how things are going for you now, I hope you don't mind me asking this question, but are you more content with yourself? Are you more happy with yourself now with how things have been going for you as far as the experience you've had and understanding what you feel is more important for yourself as opposed to the things you thought were important? Because I know you've answered that question before, but I'm wondering with those experiences you've had to where we are with yourself now, like how much you feel like you've gotten more happier with yourself throughout the years that you felt confident knowing that you are comfortable with who you are. Because I would imagine that with some insecurities you may still have with about yourself that may not be as overbearing as it was before, but now you kind of keep things on an even keel for yourself. So I'm curious to see if you're more content with how things are going for you now.
I mean, you definitely, I'm not opposed to, having opportunities continue to open themselves and to flourish and that sort of thing. Um, and I think that that's probably the right attitude to have, is just kind of like, well, if it comes or if it doesn't, you're going to be who you are. You're going to be comfortable with who you are and what you can do. And you're going to take whatever comes. You definitely going to take any opportunities seriously and pursue them to try to make cool things. I mean, it sounds simple, but that's just, that's what gives everyone fulfillment. It gives me fulfillment. Even if it never goes anywhere, like I can take a step back and, what, this is a good thing. I can be objective. I feel like this is good. I don't, sounds good to me. I mean, I feel like I can feel that about the rock band that almost made it that I played in. I can load up the album on. I don't think I have a record anymore. I've moved so much stuff around. I'm sure I'll find it. My mom has all of that stuff, including my first guitar. But she's like, "You're gonna want this someday." I'm like, "Yeah, probably not." But I can load up the album, a rock album, on on whatever medium. I think it's on Spotify too. And listen to it and go, that's a good record. It could have been something, that, but I don't have, and it was a great time with some of the greatest people I've ever met. I mean, not many people can say that they've done that and they did that and they've traveled the world doing it, and
right.
that they're a rock band flying on a jet, flying overseas to play. I mean, that's lots of rock people can say. Well, I mean, lots of famous people, obviously, but like my situation is unique. I feel in that I did all those things and you still never heard me, so it's like I did taste those things. I just didn't necessarily get hyper exposed to the money and the fame, if that makes any sense. So moving forward, I would hope that I could approach any sort of success with that same sense of levity, and hopefully that I could obtain or maintain my sense of identity in it. And like I said, it gives me a sense of purpose just to be able to be cranking things out that I know are good, that people that I respect, like Mike and Trisha, that know they're good, and having the, seeing how much, you've appreciated the film is a huge inspiration. When you have this approval from people that you respect, and you learn how to see the value in that instead of waiting like, oh man, that was a really good thing that I trying to live in the moment and appreciate those things. That's kind of the path forward come what may, I guess, for me. And like I said, I'm 44, so I'm still got a lot of gas in the tank, I think, like I said, still could be a road warrior at some point, maybe. But yeah, I mean, just like I said, that always comes with age, but just that's the path forward for me. I'd love to be able to help out with whatever they have in the future, but if not, I've got my own little ditties that I make, here and there that give me a sense of purpose.
I mean, but you feel happy with yourself though, with how things are going for you right now. Is that kind of a fair thing to say?
yeah, in the sense that I don't feel like I have to have certain things in order to be happy, but I definitely
Mm,
wouldn't turn down like additional opportunities, uh, to maybe spend more time, making music or being in some sort of creative consultant way on, whatever, whether it's film or whether it's helping someone produce a record or helping someone record a record or being a guest instrumentalist. I'm open to it, um, for sure. So like I wouldn't say that I'm unhappy, but I wouldn't be unhappy, if more, like I said, if more opportunity came. I mean, right now, it's hard times for everybody. Everybody kind of buckle down and focus on, just staying alive and keeping your friends and family, going, uh, especially post pandemic and things like that. Just kind of that puts things in perspective, as far as the future is concerned.
so are you the type of person that goes back and listens and watches the things you've worked on, to more to kind of see where you have progressed? Maybe like 10 years ago, you've done a record or done a song and you think, let me see how well the song was because I haven't heard it in X amount of years, just to see how things look. Because certain people that I've come across, once they've done something, they moved on, which is why I asked the question of once you're done, do you move on to the next beat? Or do you have time to reflect on what you could do and delve into it further, see what you may appreciate, may not appreciate about it? But apart from that, though, going back and revisiting things you've done in the past, is that something you do on somewhat of a frequent occasion or every once in a blue moon? Like, what's your approach with that?
It definitely, there's definitely a moment when you're working on the project and then you finish it. At least, I hope it's not vanity, but you'll kind of over listen or overwatch it a little bit at
Yeah.
first, but then, I let it go, but not because I'm over it, but more just because, there's on to the next thing. What else can we make? But it's definitely, I do take time. In fact, getting ready, to speak with you, I hadn't listened or to the music or watched the Frog film in months. And so I was like, oh, there was that. I forgot about that or this or that. And so that kind of gives you that hindsight. Some things could have been better, some things could have been worse, but, I'm not hypercritical of it when I listen back. But like I said, it's kind of phases. Like I said at the beginning, maybe you overdo it, but then I'm definitely the type of person to move on. But like I said, just for the sake of keeping going as far as the creative nerve is concerned.
So when you had heard, because I'm sure you already know the story, obviously, where when Tom went up to Patricia and said, "Hey, this guy saw your movie, loves it, wants to talk to you," and then she was like shocked by it, and then I reached out to your brother as well too. I'm curious to see what your perspective was when you had heard the news about, me saying I love this movie and I want to talk to you guys. What was that? Your experience in hearing all that?
I mean, you're definitely honored. And like I said, the movie had been sitting there for, we hadn't moved on because, you're still kind of, Patricia's still working on getting everything going, but time had passed. And so you'd moved past a little bit. Uh, and for whatever reason, the film didn't get watched a whole lot on YouTube, and so
Yeah.
for whatever reason, Mike had another film that called Resignation,
Yeah.
from a quality standpoint, like that was our first endeavor. I did the music for that too, and the
Mhm.
audio, and it was a disaster. I mean, it turned out okay, but like the audio is just,
Yeah, it definitely was a sticking
it
point. I
was
did,
it
yeah.
was it was I didn't know what I was doing. And so to have gone, and I definitely, the music's cool, but like it was one of those things where I came at it, with, pushing myself onto it. So just, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but like then seeing back and drinking in all of, I mean, if you filter through the comments on Resignation, it's like this sound guy should hang himself. You got to learn to be like, whoa,
uh,
okay, wow, people, everybody. I'm not gonna do that, but thanks. But then there was also a good bit of a positive that were like, but to have moved from that was a net positive, even though there's the mistakes on it, because that was the first thing of that magnitude. And granted, it's still just a short film, but we'd never made a movie that we thought would be that, I don't know if good's the right word, but we were trying to be Hollywood. We're trying to do this thing and it didn't work out, but you immediately, oh, well, that's what I did wrong there. That's what I did wrong there. I did that wrong there. And that's what I was saying. Like I mentioned earlier in the conversation that when you engineer audio for a film, it's completely different philosophies from a technical standpoint than it is for making a rock album. And
Right.
I was still in rock album mindset, and I did a lot of things to that audio that you would just simply say it was overcooked and over listened to, and you lose perspective. And unfortunately, I think that all of the original files are lost, and so I couldn't fix it if I wanted to. But going from that and then seeing what needed to change and then moving on to Frog, we learned our lessons really fast. With Frog, like I said, I just got the audio at the source, made sure that it wasn't clipping and that it was a good tone, as far as like pointing the mic a certain direction and getting thankfully, Tom, one of the good things about Tom's voice is this tone of his voice.
Yeah.
It's just hot knife through butter. It cuts right through,
Yeah.
Younger me would have been like, ooh, I can make that sound like Darth Vader or something. It's just something, not that, but I'm just saying, like, you would have overthought it rather than just going, just going to turn the fader up and there's Tom, everybody. It's like, that's what it's kind of like. And that is what I mean. Like, there is not as much fixing that sort of thing in post. And you're definitely not trying to bake in effects or anything. You're just getting what's happening, if that makes any sense. And you're doing the technical things like making sure you're pointing the mic right at, where it needs to be in order to get the signal. I kind of ran off chasing a rabbit there, but yeah, going from that movie and moving on, I feel like we made a lot of good changes in one go of it. Granted, we had the in between. We did the little, it's called Texas Rose. But
the real, Rosebud.
I did that audio, but I had already taken that lesson into doing that with those scenes in Redbud, I guess it's called now.
Yeah.
And then by the time I got around to Frog, I'm like, this is my approach. This is the way we're going to record it. It looks dark. It's going to sound dark. You can hear it. You can see it, but it's not jumping out at you, if that makes any sense. It's just there. And at the end of the day, that I feel like that audio and production, as well as and beyond the music, that just seemed like it was a little more well received, obviously, than the other stuff. Like I said, I kind of chased a rabbit there. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. I'm glad you went down that rabbit hole there, because this actually kind of gets me to the next thing that I wanted to ask about, which was the reel for Redbud, because I wanted to get your perspective on this here, because I think your brother had mentioned you about the critique that he had, that I think he said you may have had as well too, where I love the music in that short film, or in that reel, I meant to say. So Patricia had revealed to me that the guitar notes that were in that reel was a friend of yours that had come in one day and was more or less kind of jam with you guys, and then she had mentioned that he had saw the clip where Rose's mother was running out of the house, and where her husband is driving. I forgot the Rose's father's name off the top of my head, but he was driving away. And something about, if I recall correctly, she said that it was that one particular moment in that scene that he was hooked on. That's where the riff started coming about, and then became what it is in the reel that we get. But your brother had said that he wasn't entirely happy with it, because there were certain things he felt like could have changed to more or less fit the various momentums of the reel, where you have those high and low points, where he thought that riff was just too steady, where it could have worked a little bit better to fit the various moods. And when I thought I never felt that way. In fact, I thought it was handled perfectly, the way it was consistent despite all these different wide ranges of emotions. And I think he may have said that you had more or less the same critique. That I can't recall if that's correct, of how I heard it here, but I was just wondering about that perspective your brother gave, and if you had if you had shared the same sentiments about that tune that came through the reel.
Yeah, well, part of it, I think, is that when you're working on something and you hear it so many times, anything that it might be bordering on being as far as redundant or monotonous, I don't know if that's the right word,
Yeah.
becomes amplified in your mind. And so I'm not saying that there isn't something to that, but it definitely can have that effect on you. So there's that. The other thing is I tried things to build on that lick or whatever that my buddy laid down, who's brilliant. That's one thing I've learned is I like to have people around me that are as insightful and expressive and talented and skilled, to that degree, to be like, well, I don't know what to think about this, or I can't play that, but I'll get on the horn and I'll call, my buddy Chris to come over, who's touring guitar player for this band or whatever, who, can see what we're doing and is just has the eye and the ear for it, and then provide a fresh perspective. So I would definitely give him the credit as far as the tone of the whole thing. And then I came in and add some, the other elements that just kind of complemented it. But back what I was saying was I tried things to increase or change builds and drops or whatever, and it didn't feel right. That's not saying that somebody else or I couldn't have spent more time or whatever, or at some point we had to get something done because, we wanted to get it done. But yeah, like I said, everything that I tried, at least in that moment, it just sounded, it didn't sound right for sure. I don't know if forced is the right word, but we've all heard it's a long trailer, essentially, the sizzle reel for Redbud. And we've all heard the standard movie trailers sound like, we all know them by now. It's like hype hat, like dun dun dun, the big drums, and then the build, and the drum. Yeah. It's like, well, that's not gonna fit. None of that, and it's like,
it's not gonna fit. Or seeing Rose digging a ditch or digging a hole in the dirt. Yeah, it's not gonna work.
Yeah, the bass drop right then and there. Yeah, so it's like, well, what does work here? And like I said, there could have been. I can probably go back if we need to do it and rethink the whole thing. I don't know that I would use an ounce of that. I might use just my buddy's guitar lick and just leave it at that and just build completely different direction. You never know when you're going to have an idea that comes, that's going to work, but you just kind of mess with it until, like I was saying way earlier, you mess with it until you can't figure it out. Then you put it away, you walk away from it. And by golly, 9 times out of 10, in a random moment when you're at the grocery store, like, there it is, like, oh, that's cool. And sing into my phone or whatever to write that idea down so that I are coming out, but sorry, I guess I hope that answers your question as far as
it does. Yeah, it does. And don't feel bad that you're going into tangent, because I think that's what's one thing about lovely what you and your brothers do, is that you guys do that, but it actually leads to somewhere. So, but because it's interesting, because when you're saying that, it's weird because from what I'm understanding here, that you and your brother have the same more or less critique, but yours is probably not as what's the best way, as hard as your brother's critique about it, because he felt like he liked it a lot, but he just thought it could have been more fluctuating, where it seems like you kind of figured out along the way that leave it as it is, but if we could have done something better with it, we would have done it. It's kind of more or less the impression that I'm getting here. Okay, so here's what I wanted to ask you about with regards to about you, because when you talked about the critiques that you were getting here, because that was one thing about your brother that actually was one of the first things that I asked him about in our conversation, where someone made a critique about Frog where they couldn't see the movie very well when Frog was in the truck. And your brother gave this explanation about why he shot it that way, so that way the audience gets an idea of Frog's perspective and the metaphor behind all that. And then you talked about Resignation, where people were critiquing the sound and saying some pretty mean stuff. But now, how do you feel like you handle critiques for yourself when it comes to someone who is coming out to say, I didn't like what you did, whether it be very harsh or very constructive, whatever the case may be, but any form of critique that comes your way, how do you think you handle it better this time around than you would have, say, over 10, couple years ago, whatever the case may be?
Well, there's honestly, I don't know. There's really not much you could say to me that hasn't been said at some point in my career. You know, it's like, and so I've had a chance to weigh it and to balance it, like I said, with some perspective and with some levity. Is it perfect? No. Is it good? Do I like it? That's the big one. Do I like it? Does the people I made it for, do they like it? And that, at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. And I think it's an age, and some people learn it earlier, but obviously with age, you know, you're like, can't control what other people think, but and you can't let that keep you, you know, from doing what it is that you want to do or moving forward. You want everyone to like it, but you know, at the end of the day, as long as I'm happy with it, I'm happy with myself, I mean, it doesn't affect me the way that it used to. I mean, it's pretty much rolls. It depends on who it's coming from too, for sure. Some rando, you know, in the YouTube comments who thinks, I mean, when I grew up, it was only Siskel and Ebert, and that was it, you know. And now it's like everybody's got a, well, the reason I didn't like it, I'm like, nobody asked you. But I mean, enjoy your forum. What have you made? You know, a lot of times that's usually the case. People think that but I mean, it's like it's a dime a dozen. You know, those people. You know, they're if it's an overwhelming thing. Also, too, with resignation, you got those harsh things, but you also got those things that they complement it, but they're like, I really love this, but this element was a little bit this, and so it's like you have to take that correction. You have to be able to be self-aware, you know, and to look at yourself and be like, well, otherwise you're gonna eventually be miserable too, and you're not gonna get anywhere. That's for sure. And I guess if that's that, you know, you just want to not listen or care what anyone thinks, then that's one thing. And like I said, it's also depends on the project, not just who the if it's something like my own personal record, like that I'm working on now, and where I'm in charge of it, you know, from beginning to the end, to the time it goes out the door, I'm making that because I want to make it. And I don't have a producer or other band members or songwriters or some client, you know, or some other creative entity necessarily that I have to, not please is the right word, but it's, I guess, please, you know, make
appease or appeal to,
or you want to do a good job for them. Yeah. So in a project like that, I would probably roll off criticism, you know, but something like in a joint project, like what we're doing with these short films with Patricia and with my brother, you have to take the criticism, especially the criticism from them, you know, and they're going to find a diplomatic way to deliver the message for you. At least they're going to try. Sometimes my brother's like, no, that sucks. You know, I mean, but typically, in his defense, he's pretty, you know, will try to explain his perspective, you know, and it's just, I don't do anyone but myself. I do my own self a disservice,
right,
as far as getting better as a person and better as a creative force, accepting criticism, listening. I mean, you can listen to all of it, but you only have to accept it from the people that you know mean you no harm, or they mean, you know, to see you blossom in some sense. Or like with Patricia, you're doing it in a service to someone else's project. I mean, I just don't want to be that jerk that's like, nah, here's the soundtrack. That's the way it is. You know, you don't get to change anything. I mean, you're just not going to have a lot of real friends if you approach your life that way, you know. And Patricia went from being, that's that kind of as an add-on. That's kind of the bonus of being of that mindset, is you make new friends that you're glad you have. You know, Patricia started off as she didn't know me. You know, I'm sure she was probably a little skeptical because, you know, when she first met my brother and they were already speaking about making these projects, and she didn't know but then she, she needed music, and my brother was like, you know, my, my brother makes some music. You're welcome to check out his stuff. Um, and so I was able to go from just a guy who held the boom on the Redbud thing to meeting her, once you've been in the thick with somebody, for several days of shooting and in hard Texas heat, you bond and you get along. And so it moved from being, just a business acquaintance to a friend. And so at the end of the day, we all do this. I think one of the main in games or in goals of making these types of things is to communicate and to connect with people, to share your soul in an attempt to connect with someone else on a deeper level, so to speak. It's kind of a two-edged sword in that sense, or serves a dual purpose.
Do you because I'm actually curious about what you just said with regards to your experiences with, because you talked about how Patricia, you felt like maybe at certain points was a little hesitant to some degree, and not necessarily working with you, but just in certain areas about maybe how you may make suggestions that she may not be a little too, maybe not be resistant, but just be like, all right, well, I'll consider, but I don't know you. It's kind of the approach, right? But you mentioned about going through the thick and thin and having the rough, the long shooting days, and then being through the thick and thin, and then eventually forming a great friendship out of it, to the point where she was open to your ideas about, I want to try like this. Okay, do it. And then hearing your suggestions that this works great. So obviously she had developed a sense of trust through the work you guys had done there. So I'm actually curious about that shooting experience for yourself, because here's the thing, Patricia, because from my experience when in talking with her, she definitely does have a very approachable personality about her, where you can talk to her about anything, and you guys can, because someone can have a conversation for hours. And because I certainly have had that experience with her. But when you were working with her, I'm not sure what it was where you felt that, where the connection more or less clicked, where you realized, okay, I can be friends with her. We are a team because we went through this. What was that moment for you where you realized that's where you guys had formed that bond, more or less?
Honestly, I think it was at the end of shooting the Redbud stuff. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about how, I think it was something along the lines about how we both believed that the Great Pyramids were created by sound. I mean, it was something along those lines. And I was like, well, this person's been down the same YouTube rabbit hole that I have. I mean, after you've already put in those hours, and they have seen that you're capable, and that you're working hard. And so it's kind of like, if you've ever worked in a restaurant, the wait staff doesn't ever really get along until they worked a hard shift together and then gone to the pub after, and they're like, I already did this, and I guess that cross applies into pretty much any industry of that sort, where you do work and then you have a moment of, oh, well, I can trust that person has my back, in battle, and has me covered in a foxhole. And so I think that's just human nature. But it would have to be, like I said, at the end of that day, once, the initial, I think I'd met her before, like once, but briefly. But at the end of the day, once we had a good day and we knew we had some good stuff, I mean, it always can be improved upon, but it far exceeded in many ways at least I would think, our expectations, as far as the performance of the actors, the way the stuff looked, just as far as the footage, listening back, to the audio, I'm like, oh, this sounds good, sounds pristine. So yeah, at the end of that, at the wrap, where you're just sitting around, kicking the rocks, shooting the bull, talking about stuff. That's when I first had the conversation with her about the type of music that she wanted for that, for Redbud. And yeah, we just kind of hit it off after that, and when we worked on Redbud and everything, I think she would come over. Like I said, my brother and I are roommates. I have my studio in my room, and he's got his studio in his room. And so we would just hang out with Patricia for hours and just talk about the film, but just building that relationship with her as a friend, that always just increases the trust factor altogether. And then when you're that trusting, you're able to try things and do things, and bring things out of each other that may not have been there with someone else that, you don't have that with. But all kudos to her. I mean, she is, like you said, she's very approachable is definitely the right word. But she's also, there's a little bit of Patricia for sure in that character.
Yeah, I agree.
Takes no crap from anyone, and that's very characteristic of the personality of Texas, the Texas country type small town woman. She knows she can do everything the man can't. She just doesn't want to, sometimes, it's like, it's like, I can change the tire. I learned how to fix the transmission from my mom. And so it's like, not saying that city women can't do that, but it seems to be in abundance, but there's that personality that, is quintessential to the types of stories that she creates altogether. Is, don't take any crap from anyone, but you don't lead with that. She leads with grace for sure. So she's definitely easy, and she puts you at ease for sure. So creating and being vulnerable, like I said, there were times when I had to just sit there in our living room with my guitar and sing this song that you don't know how they're going to take it, this person that you don't know too well. But she made that, there was enough confidence in me at that point, coupled with her grace, that, those two things, just seemed to work well, seemed to be able to contribute towards a quality finished product, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. So, now when you have time to reflect about all, the years you guys have, the amount of years you have to work together, I hope this doesn't make me sound like I'm being conceited when I ask this question about what involving me with this year, but having someone like myself come out and say, hey, I love your movie. I love what you guys have done. And, I've asked a question before, but I'm hoping you can delve a little bit further here, where I wonder if you had reflecting about all the times you guys have worked together, especially with Frog, the good times, the bad times, and then, the easy moments and then the hard moments, and hearing someone like myself say, I love your movie. I really love your film. And this is why I love your movie. And then having Patricia reach out to your brother, say, hey, some guy loves our film who's out in the East Coast. And then not too long after that, they're having a meeting about making the next short film. Because Patricia had said before that, she was almost on a standstill with that, and seeing how that had trajectory changed for her, and then also involving your brother along the way too. I'm curious about how your perspective may have, I wouldn't say maybe changed, but probably was shine a light upon an area that maybe you had, I wouldn't say forgot, but just kind of like put it in a Rolodex, and then one day, boom, someone comes out and says, I love this. I know it's a kind of a weird, long, convoluted question, but I hope you understand what I'm referring to here.
No, it's for sure. It's in a word, it's definitely inspiring, man. I mean, because I'm not in any rush to do things, if that makes any sense, and that can almost create a sense of I don't know if complacency is the right word, but you're like, there is something that you get from having people tell you, hey man, that was really good, and you're like, oh yeah, it was. I think, oh, cool. You think so? There's a right way to receive that positive information, in my opinion, that creates creativity or recreates or reignites something that, because we need that as people. A man is not an island. You do it for the reasons that you did it. But having someone come in and say, hey, man, I really enjoyed that. Definitely, you're definitely, like I said, I went back, a couple nights ago, and I was like, I haven't listened to this in a while, and it's like, oh well, that that sounds pretty good. I should maybe try some other things. It definitely opens, like I said, it creates creativity, if that makes any sense,
Yeah.
or recreates it for you, uh, for sure. When someone else is liking your stuff, so it's definitely, I've honestly now I'm like, I probably should finish that record. I probably should just bear down and finish that record that I'm working on. It definitely puts you in the right mindset and the right soul set, if that's a phrase, uh, to make yourself get going. Get something done,
Mhm.
uh, for your own good. For your own good. Life can become pretty mundane otherwise.
It's funny because when I'm listening to you talk, there's a part of me that wonders about how you look at things because because I hope you don't mind me bringing me bringing your brother in the mix here, but when I hear you talk, I hope you understand what I mean by this here, but I feel like what's the best way I can say it, because I'm trying to be very careful about this here, but I feel like when you speak, I'm sorry, when you speak, you're at your best when you speak through your music, if that makes any sense. Is that kind of a fair assessment to
Yeah,
make?
man, mama, I've always had a face made for radio.
That's what wasn't what I
Sorry.
was thinking at all. No, but
Oh, sorry.
what I'm trying to refer to is that I feel like it's weird because I'm listening to you talk, and then when I listen to your music, I hear you at your most honest, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
Because
No,
I'm listening to you talk about how you approach, let's say for example, like with Frog, where the two songs you have in the film, you look at a lot like your brother, but because you and your brother have the same viewpoint, I think, to a degree, but you guys have a different approach about how you go about it and expressing that viewpoint, if you will. But I hear as I'm listening to you talk, I feel like the most honest you are is when you're playing the music, whether it be a cover song, whether it be a song that you're writing for someone else or for specifically for seeing this kids like with Frog. That's where I feel like you are the most honest because that's where you have the most understanding because you understand the emotions that the music provides in that moment and you know how to bring that honesty out of it, if that makes any sense. So is that a fair
yeah, I
assessment to
think.
make with how you go about it?
Oh no, for sure. I mean,
Okay.
when I've done interviews and things like that in the past, but part of the reason I do what I do is because that is, like you said, that's where I really feel like I'm being fulfilled and communicating, all of the things that are truly going on. Because when you're dealing with people on an interpersonal level like this, we're always holding something back to some degree. And you
Mhm.
have to, you have
Yeah,
to, in
yeah, yeah.
order, you have to be, nobody wants to, just be the heavy person to be around. And so with me, I've definitely, like when I've done radio interviews in the past or whatever, definitely the same thing. You also battle what you hear in your mind. You're supposed to sound like and be, and so
Hmm.
just trying to be in the moment is sometimes a little bit more difficult interpersonally for because honestly, I'm a little bit of an introvert. Like I said, this is honestly my first time to use Zoom, mostly because it just hasn't had any use, for what I do as far as my daily life is concerned.
Right.
Um, but I am a bit of an introvert. And so, being in the moment the way you would want to be in the moment with music, these two things are not necessarily like the other. And
They're not the same thing.
right. And when you're doing the creative thing, especially me now, I pretty much almost have to be alone in a room, with all the doors closed and knowing for certain that no one is hearing you and judging you in order to really kind of just have the idea come in from the ether, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, like I said, luckily my dad he was a speech and theater and literature English teacher. So I learned the basics of being able to communicate on a certain level. And that's part of the reason I think why Mike gravitated toward film, because he's a little better, with, I don't know, with engaging on that conversational level.
Mhm.
And for some reason in my mind, that translates more in the visual side of things with musicians. I mean, like, I'm certain we've all known them, they be a little mixed bag. You never know what you're going to get,
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
as far as their true personality
yeah,
is
yeah,
concerned. And a lot of times it takes two different headspaces to be in.
yeah.
And
I
so
agree.
to try to figure out, which one to be in order to, I don't know if it's left brain or right brain, but uh, it can be difficult to figure out which side, you need to be speaking from, if that makes any sense. Sorry, it's a little bit of a
No, it does. I understand what you
obscure
mean by that here. I really do understand. But so I'm actually curious about something with yourself because you brought it because I did start to notice something about yourself, and I always, I mean, as we were talking before, that I always ask the question of what are some things you want me to get into, and what many things you don't want me to get into, because I'm fully aware that how I like to go about the conversation with somebody, and because I'm looking for something specific. But the thing is, because your brother said something so brilliantly about looking for the truth without, but not having the words to express the truth, if you will, right?
uh,
And that expression that he had, well, that remark that he made about finding the truth, if you will, I have that same approach, but with having to have a conversation with somebody, because um, it's. I hope it doesn't come out the wrong way, but the challenges of having to speak with somebody that may be a little bit more reserved in it being more engaging in the conversation. So it's really about, for me, what I can pick up from them that they would have done in the past, that I can see where they've opened up the most. You see what I'm saying?
I think so, yeah.
So when I'm listening to you talk, I'm actually glad you are going off in a tangent here, because I'm learning more about you along the way, and I picked up certain things where I'm not saying I'm going to ask you hard personal questions. It's not what I'm referring to, but I want to ask questions about you that I can draw a little bit more out to learn more about you, because you've opened up certain areas that I figured that's interesting. Remember to ask them about this and that. So when I ask you, when I bring up the subject about how I feel like you're the most honest when you're playing your music, I I noticed that halfway through the conversation, where I realized that, okay, when he's talking about the music, it clicks. The way you're able to point out certain things, I was like, something, I can see something here. Now, if I'm asking you a question about something else, I did notice a big difference where I wouldn't say I'm not saying you struggle. It's not what I'm getting at, but I can tell there's a big difference about how you speak about your approach with music as opposed to something else. And I have the same exact issue too, to a degree, because I have a thing where I know I want to say, but I know how I want to say it. I know what I want to ask. I know how I want to ask it, but I haven't really found the way to do it right for myself. And so it's almost like the struggles I think you're going through to a degree with engaging in the conversation. I'm not saying with everybody, but just I'm sure to this degree here, I understood it right away. So I hope you don't mind me bringing this up here to point this out here. But when I saw this here, there's it's like it's so unique for me to see that, because I could see where you have flourished the most when it comes to your form of expression, and where you probably didn't get enough, I wouldn't say enough practice, but where you probably didn't have to do as much of it in other areas, if you will. Because the question I was going to ask next was, because you talked about you've done interviews before in the past. So I'm curious about how you felt about yourself at that time, where you had several interviews on the radio and amongst in various parts of the country, and I'm sure around the world, where you felt like if maybe the way you conduct yourself in those interviews may have been a little bit more reserved, a little bit more open, depending on the circumstances. I'm curious about how you looked at yourself at that time, and how you would engage in those conversations, and then how you are engaging with me here now. Is there a big difference that you can recall how things have changed as far as where you are with yourself in this conversation to where you would have been 10, 15, 20 years ago, that may have not been the same to in some degree here?
Oh, well, definitely, life can definitely change you over time and over
Right.
decades. And there are things that you could argue were maybe better about when I was younger. Uh, I probably fall somewhere. I need to fall somewhere in between the two, if that makes any sense.
Hmm.
Back in the day when I would do those interviews and things, I had quite a bravado and I believed quite a few myths about myself. Maybe not to the maybe some people be like, no, you weren't that bad, but at least in my mind, I look in hindsight and I'm like,
Yeah.
man, that was really arrogant, that you approached it that way or that you believed something about yourself that may or may not be true. And so I'm probably still in the phase where I now am judging that person. And sometimes that in other life events that happened, in all honesty, I went through some struggles after the band. I mean, there's a lot of that music, especially the stuff like for Frog, like I said, I relate to that because, after experiencing a lot of disappointment in my late 20s, early 30s, I like every other predictable person, didn't always, make the right decisions, and so dealt with things in an improper way. And so you look back at yourself and you're like, and as a repercussion, suffered some consequences, if that makes any sense,
Yeah.
of being a certain way. Um,
Yeah. I know what you mean.
and now you're like, I find myself, you know, hiding in the corners, because I'm like, and that's not the right way either. It's not, like I said earlier, somewhere in the middle is probably where to land. But like this is like the first interview I've done in a long time, mostly because I've kind of shied away from it because I feel like I had reached a certain plateau. I had done a lot of I didn't know what else to do now. And I don't think that I'm the super important person like I may have thought that I was then, but like I said, I'll probably look down on myself a little too much in that degree. I don't know if that's a little like overly vulnerable, but definitely the false confidence is completely gone, and the new confidence is trying to be more honest with myself, if that makes any sense,
Yeah,
as
I know
far as
what you mean.
approaching things like this, for
Yeah.
instance, um, being in the moment, you know.
Right.
Uh, so again, I don't know if I answered your question
No,
there.
it really does answer my question here because I mean, but then again, I'm not sure what your answer is going to be. Because I don't expect the answer to be. I'm hoping that the answer would never be generic, if that makes any sense. Because it's so because I'm the fact that you're bringing this up here, it's interesting because when I first started doing the show, I think I talked with somebody about this not too long. I'm trying to remember who it was that I brought this up here, but I had I knew what I wanted to do when I was conversing with somebody. And the thing that I did not want to do was because I don't do an intro for the show. And one of the reasons why I don't do an intro for the show is because I feel very uncomfortable doing like, hey, what's going on, guys? We're here to I mean, I do that for my reviews, but even I'm not the most comfortable doing that. I've gotten better with it, and I'm just gonna stick with this one because it's easy. I know what I gotta do. It's much more easier for me just start the conversation and pick it up from there and I'll formulate some formula to kind of more or less be the intro for me, if you will. Because something about the fact that if I do an intro with somebody like, hey guys, we're here and we got Dave Ozmun here. And Dave, tell me about this. And then all of a sudden, if I start asking you questions about, well, tell me about that time in your life, the momentum changes like that, where the authenticity comes out more. What was that crap that we did 15 minutes beforehand? That was, hey, what's going on? It's just something it doesn't feel right for me to do that. And I never wanted to do it, but I have done it before to a degree, but it's not my cup of tea. And so when I hear you talk about that, it reminded me a lot about what my approach was with these forms of conversations here. So I hope you don't mind me bringing myself into this here, but it's funny that you bring it up because it sparked something in my head about what it was that I connected with when you said that here. And I agree with you 100% when you said about finding that form of honesty, because I think I've come to a point where myself, because I'm 37, but when as I'm thinking about what I want to do, I'm like, man, I should have figured this shit out like 15 years ago, and because my son is 15, and the things that I don't want him to discover late in life, I'm like, this is the shit you need to do now. Discover these things right now. That's my advice to you. Find what makes you happy and stick with that. Be completely honest with yourself, because those are the things that I just never really knew how to do very well, because I was living this I had this delusion about how what I think I wanted, and then I'm sure to a degree you felt that way too when you were pursuing these things, but you got the pursuits that you wanted to pursue, but there was a cloth of like a facade that you thought was real that didn't realize wasn't what was going to make you really happy. And I'm sure it took you a long time to realize that. So not to say I've ever had that experience, but I had the experience of the cloth being the wool being pulled over my eyes, where I realized, oh, okay, this is not what I really wanted. And I found that out later on in life. And that's what I try to show my son. That shit's not real. This is what's real. And what's real is what makes you happy. All that other bullshit doesn't make any sense, though. Don't waste your time on that. And I hope he will take that in consideration. But again, I don't mean to take away from your spotlight on this here, but it's funny that you said it, because I resonate with that 100% on how you felt. So I'm really happy you shared that with me. And I hope that by me asking those questions doesn't make you, I didn't make you feel vulnerable by any means, because that's certainly not the case here. But I like capture these moments, because here's what I really want to happen. I've said this before a million times, but I mean it every time I say this. Wherever you may be in your life, I hope that someday, that whether you are still in the same path where you are putting music together for films or whatever the case may be, but I really do hope that someone one day will come across this, that, I heard this interview you had done 10 plus years ago, and this is what you said about yourself at that time. And I've never heard you said this before, but when I'm watching you now, you're not the same person. You seem much more happier. You seem more content with yourself. Um, what were you thinking at that time? And I'm hoping that at that point in your life that you would be in a position where you can reflect on that and have good memories over about what it was you said, and then come and be at peace with yourself, if that makes any sense. So it's kind of a long-term goal for me to hopefully have to see with you, because I would hope then by that point that you and I are still very much in conversation with each other. We're like, where we can just more or less kind of pick up where we last left off, if you will, where because that's really the goal in mind that I have with a lot of guests that I have on the show, that years down the line, I'm not saying 10 years from now we're gonna have another conversation, but and I want that to happen organically. But if it does happen, I always believe it will, but if it does happen, that it'll be a situation where we've conversed, we've had experiences, and then we come back and then boom, share those experiences together, and then we have a 3-4 hour conversation as a result of that, that's captured and encapsulated, and therefore it's always going to be around forever, and we can always use that as a point of reference, if you will. I said before with Patricia, and I said it before with Mike, your brother, that Frog in a lot of ways it's going to sound super cliche, because I hate to sound cliche. I really don't like to say things like as if though it came out of a movie, but it really did in a lot of ways change my life. You have no idea how much that movie really impacted me in the various forms that I've taken away from the movie, primarily with Tom's performance, the story, of course, but really it was also your music as well, too. Because, when I'm hearing you talk about how you find the truth in the music for that moment, I believe you, because when I first heard that song, watching the film, like I said this to your brother, I was completely still, because it was almost as if though everything that I had felt from that movie, that song captured, especially the way that it closes off. And it's not something I've come across very, very often. And I made a comparison. I don't know if people would. I'm not sure how people feel about it. I don't care, but it's like I haven't had that kind of a feeling with a movie that left me sitting still when I saw it from start to finish. Honestly, since The Godfather. I understand people may feel like that short film, but like The Godfather. Well, you have to understand, it was what it made me feel when I saw that movie. That feeling I haven't had I hadn't had since I saw The Godfather for the very first time, because the story was so epic. It wasn't difficult, but it was very complicated, but it wasn't hard to follow. But once you get to the end, everything paid off. And when you hear that tune at the very end, it encapsulates everything that you felt about that journey that closed it off in such a beautiful way that it leaves a great impression with you. And I haven't had that feeling since the first time until when I saw The Godfather, and this movie brought that for me. So I think that movie is a work of art. It's a masterpiece, in my opinion. And I think the people that have put this film together have made a truly wonderful film that I think showcases what true art is how true art is made when you have the people that work so well together and allow these ideas to come to fruition and not have to hinder them along the way to prevent their full vision to come to fruition, if you will. So having heard your story and hear your reasons why you approach it that way, hearing your brother's story, hearing why he approaches it that way, hearing Patricia's story, why she approached it that way, even to Tom as well too, to a degree, because we kind of went off all over the places ourselves. But hearing everyone else's perspective about what it was about the film that had brought something out of them or what they brought into the film, it seems like everyone just let everyone do their thing and it meshed very, very well. So it's in a lot of ways it speaks to me about how there's a heavy subject matter, but the people that put it together worked on the best terms with the best intention, and you got the best results. And it's a very rare thing to accomplish. And I think that movie, in my opinion, encompasses all the great things that could happen when you make a film and the impact that it could have on somebody. I understand a lot of people don't know of this movie, and I have making every intention to promote this film because the way that it made me feel, I hope it could have that same effect on somebody else. I don't know if it's going to change their life. I don't know about all that, but hopefully they'll realize that there are great filmmakers out there, which in turn, what I hope will offer more opportunities for you guys to expand on your arsenal, if you will, on a grander scale, not for the fame and glory, but really purely for making great work with what you are able to provide to them. So I'm going off on a tangent here, but I guess if we want to close off here, if there's anything you want to say in closing about anything we've discussed or anything you want to say just to kind of part ways here, but at this point, the floor is going to be yours here if you want to say something here.
No, I mean, that's definitely the words that you want to hear. I would rather, I'm a real person, and I don't mean that. I mean, like, it's easier to just be real and be honest than it is to try to maintain a facade. And that also is the same for the movie. And I would rather make something that makes an actual impact, that some hope, that's the lifeline that you're throwing out there, is like, look, I don't have to have everyone like this. That's not the reason that we made it. We made it and we added the parts that we added because we were reaching each other, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. Patricia wanted to reach out. She did maybe have what Mike had, but Mike also wanted to reach out in a creative sense from his soul. And so they found, and then I want to speak from my soul. Like you said, it's easier through music. It's easier to I could talk to you and try to describe the ice cream, or here, you can just eat it, and tell me, what you think about whether or not it, right. And so I think that's the goal. Obviously, you're throwing a net out there, but the goal with the net this time is just to actually tell a story and to make an impact, and to hear you say that it's worth more to me to have known, or to know that it has affected a person in such a way that you always hope, but you're like, you don't ever really know or even believe that it will. I mean, granted, with Frog, I was like, I think this is pretty good. It might not be for everyone, but I think the people that are going to like it, like hopefully like yourself, are going to really like it and really appreciate it, and can hopefully take that and use it as their own inspiration. And then here you are, in hindsight, inspiring me back, and so it builds on itself for sure. But that comes from a place of being honest and real. You don't get that. You can wow people with Jerry Bruckheimer or Michael Bay, movies, mm-hmm. but and some of those are great. You know, there's a place for that, for sure. I love it. I love it. Um, but there's also a need and a place for this type of a message as well. And so thank you. I appreciate that. Means a lot that it meant something of such value to you.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm inspired, you know, now to go make more. It definitely, you know, iron sharpening the iron, as they say. And in that situation, hopefully that, you know, continues to be the case. So I kind of rambled to the end.
As did I.
Always a perfect ending for a ramble, you know. It's like, of course he ended up. That's the end, you know.
Well, I guess in this way, I guess for the cameras that we can just both us out. But again, you know, I really do mean what I say about everything that this film has done, and really to hear your story, and get that lead up to that. Because I said before that I do care about the product, but it's not about the product that I'm seeking after. It's more about the journey leading up to the product, if you will, because I think that's more interesting than the actual result to a degree. And then what happens after the fact, because those are, I think, where you really get to know the person through those, as far as they're most authentic, the most honest here. So I feel like in that sense, whoever comes across this and listens to you talk and watches this conversation here, that they got to see something quite unique here in that respect. And then in time, when they revisit it here and they see where you are with your at that point in life, they can see the differences at that point and see where you progress from there. So I think that would be something that I hope that people will be able to see and accomplish years from now. But anyways, I'm rambling on here. But anyways, I always want to say thank you to everyone who comes here. But I really mean when I say thank you so much. And it was an honor to speak with you. And I would love to do this again down the line here for us to converse and where we last left off here.
Sorry, my phone went off. I forgot to put it on mute. But no, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. It's an honor to have been considered for it, and enjoyed speaking with you for sure. And I truly enjoy the fact that, you know, you liked the film as much as you did, and had me on and heard me ramble and didn't cut me off. You know? So, but thanks again, man. I appreciate it. I look forward to again in the future.